Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
If you were with me yesterday, hopefully you were with me yesterday, I talked about today's episode, but if for those who weren't with me, just a quick recap. I talked about our houses, places we live in. Things are always breaking. It's just that doorknob or just a thing that things wear out. That's the nature of houses. They sit out in the elements and things go bad and they get used and things wear out. And that was kind of my metaphor for relationships, and that there's always, eventually, I'm not saying they're going to break, but eventually they get a little bit of wear and tear, and you need to give them some tender loving care, some TLC. There's going to be conflict in your life. And as I indicated yesterday, I was going to have a conflict expert on. Today joining me is Dana Shea, and Dana is just that. She's a certified relationship coach, as well as a keynote speaker. And she's got a lot of relationship experience with her. She has a podcast called Rebuilding Us. It was formerly Real Relationship Talk. It's a marriage podcast. And if you've been with me for any time, I look at relationships as relationships, and there's romantic relationships and there's business relationships, and they really kind of involve a lot of the same thing. Trust is trust. But I think the biggest thing that Dana brings to this is 25 years of marriage. She literally lives what she talks about. And I'll let her share her stories. She's 25 years in a marriage, things fall apart. Things get a little wear and tear, and she's had to deal with them. So she speaks from experience. So Dana, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Frank. It's such a great privilege to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. 25 years of marriage.
Yes, we got married when we were 5.
Yeah.
No, but we did get married super young, and I don't recommend, we were 18 and 21 when we got married. And I don't recommend that you get married that young, because there's so many things that you just do not know. You don't know yourself. You don't know what your future holds. You don't know how to do relationships. There's no 18-year-old who knows how to do marriage well. So we've been through a lot in our marriage, and that's really what has propelled me to actually help other people to work through their issues as well.
When did you say, okay, hey, I'm going to be working, I'm going to become this relationship coach, this certified relationship coach?
I think the early seeds were planted probably in year 2 of our marriage. My husband and I, like I said, we got married super young. We almost immediately started going through problems, and we started reaching out. We wanted help. We wanted people to mentor us. We wanted people to show us the way. And unfortunately, we thought, people would be lining up to help us, and people just were not willing to really be transparent and honest. And so we made a promise to ourselves that if we ever got out of the marriage, trauma that we were in, that we would be the mentor, or we didn't have the word coaching back then, but we would be the mentor, we would be the helper that we were looking for. So that's kind of when the seed was initially planted. Fast forward about 10 years, I started speaking. And so I would have people, come up to us. I've always been super transparent about our lives. And so we would just have random people just be like, hey, do you help people? Do you counsel? And they didn't even know what they wanted. And so, fast forward a few more years, I was working at my church at the time. And so I was helping a lot of married couples at that point, just kind of doing just some, not therapeutic counseling, but just kind of peer-to-peer counseling. And I started to say the things over and over. I found myself saying these things. And so I thought, I should probably resource myself. I should probably have some sort of library where I could send people to this information. And that's really where the podcast was birthed. And so through the podcast, that actually launched the marriage coaching business. So it's not something that I ever would have dreamed of. It was not something that I saw happening, but it was what needed to happen. And so today I'm able to not only resource the podcast, but then also to help a lot of couples who are in the throes of trauma in their marriages.
Yeah. I think the reason people weren't lining up to help you, just speculating, is that people have their own, I'll call it rot in their lives. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know how many people I've run across where it's like, wow, they really have a great relationship, and the next thing you know, they're divorcing,
Oh yeah.
right? And it's like, oh my God, I didn't see that. It kind of scares you because you see your own life, and it's like, wow, we have lots of problems. We can keep it together in front of people, um, and you look at other people like, wow, they're perfect. I guess
Yeah, I
not.
mean, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. We have seen so many of those early couples that we went to, and many of them are divorced. And these were people that we looked up to, that we even idolized, and to see that their marriages fell apart. I used to often say of my husband and I, no matter what room we were in, we always had the worst marriage in the room. It didn't matter what room. I was like, we have the worst marriage in the room. And we started off, again, being a young couple. We used to hang with 5 other couples. We did everything together. We all had little kids together. We did everything, and none of those couples are together. And we thought we had the worst marriage out of
Yeah,
all of them. So you're exactly right. Sometimes people aren't willing to share because they're dealing with their own stuff. And if they share with you, then that's going to expose a lot of what they're dealing with.
it's funny you say that because my wife and I similar. I don't think we ever said we have the worst marriage in the room, but we looked around. Wow, they have fun. They're going on vacation together, and it wasn't that we just chose not to do those things, and maybe that was part of it because finances are a huge stressor. And my wife and I are totally on the same page with respect to finances for the most part. Little things like don't use the coupon, do this kind of little bickering, right? Um, but yeah, all those marriages are by the wayside. It's like, really? I can't believe this.
Right.
Um, Anyhow, and looking through your stuff and preparing for this, I find it interesting. You talk about the uh, transformative power of conflict.
Hmm.
Um, and I want you to kind of address that. It's almost like you're saying, hey, conflict is there, deal with it. It's not horrible. It might be a
That's
good
right.
thing.
Yeah, so many people are afraid of conflict. My husband and I grew up in very different environments. I grew up in a very dysfunctional home where I saw physical abuse, all kinds of
Mm,
conflict, emotional conflict, conflict every day, all day. That's what I grew up in. And my husband grew up very opposite, where his parents, not even did they not, they didn't fight. They never even disagreed in front of him. So we are total polar opposites coming together. And so whenever we would have conflict in our marriage, he would run because he had no skills. He had no idea how to handle that. And I would pursue him
mm,
because I had lots of experience,
yeah,
unfortunately, handling conflict the wrong way. And so, what I've learned through my own work that I've had to do on myself and through my own therapy, all of that, right? I've learned that conflict is not something to be avoided. Conflict is a teacher. So when we pay attention to conflict, it teaches us a lot about ourselves. It teaches us a lot about our values. Why am I having this reaction to that thing? Why is this not just a normal disagreement? If you've been in a relationship with anybody, whether it be a marriage, a business partnership, whatever, there are sometimes times that we run into conflict and we're like, why did I have that reaction? Why was I so angry? If you pay attention to that, then conflict can be an incredible teacher, and it can teach you things that you would not have gained that knowledge any other way. And so then you're able to say, "Wow, okay, thank you conflict. Thank you for what you're showing me. Now
yeah.
I can approach this from a place of maturity and from a place of solution instead of being defensive or cutting people off or feeling, bad about myself or judging someone else because of this conflict."
Yeah, I mean, it is true. I kind of alluded to it earlier. We all have really a sample size of one as to what families are about. Really, any even work relationships. Working for somebody. I had a corporate job for a number of years, 6 years, and there was conflict there. There's always stress. Budgets, things that need to be done, and you kind of look at other people. It's like I wonder why is their grass so green? Kind of a thought. Um, but then one of my coworkers who came from another company said at one point, he says, eventually the rot sets in, right? Eventually the honeymoon's over, because as I talked about in yesterday's podcast, eventually things wear out and we're not hitting on the same cylinders. Um, so um, Active listening, vulnerability, empathy, which of those are the most important, or how should we be leaning into those things?
Yeah, they're all important. They're all essential building blocks of a healthy relationship. The word vulnerability, I think, is getting a lot of attention, especially in the last 10 years or so. Brene Brown's kind of
Yeah.
the forefront teacher on all of this. But a lot of times we look at these emotionally charged words like empathy or vulnerability, intimacy, and they can be very uncovering, right? They can put us on edge a little bit. And in order for any kind of relationship to work, be it a romantic relationship, a business partnership, a parental relationship, we have to embody these elements. So to be vulnerable doesn't mean that I'm going to sit on your couch and cry all day, but it means that I'm going to be honest enough to say what you did was not okay, or I disagree. Sometimes we're in these business meetings and something is said and we really do disagree with it, and but we don't say anything. Why? Because we're afraid of conflict. I don't want to speak up because what if I speak up and then people disagree with me? Or what if they perceive me to be fill in the blank, whatever your thoughts are? So we hide. And what vulnerability does is vulnerability says, no, I'm actually going to speak up and I'm going to be seen. I'm going to say, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if I agree with that. That's why you're there. I love going into different business settings, and I've always kind of been a little bit of a disruptor, not on purpose, not because I'm trying to blow up people's thing, but because I trust that the reason that I am in this room is because I have something to give. I'm not just here to receive, I also have something to give. So if there's something that's said that, I have a question about, or maybe I think it could be done a different way, it doesn't mean that they have to totally change what they're doing. But vulnerability says, I'm at least going to speak up. And
Hmm.
that is what people need to do in their romantic relationships as well. When you see something that is rubbing you the wrong way, or you see something that could be done better, speaking up, that's all a part of being vulnerable.
Yeah, you talked about chasing your husband. Um, I just, I have an image of that, but he's avoiding conflict, and many people feel that that's the key to harmony. Obviously, his parents. Now, I don't know anything about that relationship. I assume, I hope they're still together. I hope everybody stays together. Um, how did you kind of talk him into not fighting, but just saying, okay, let's deal with this. Let's put this out there.
Yeah. His parents are great and they are still together. But to be honest, I would say to him, I don't want a marriage where we just get along and we smile and everything looks good, but we're not really connected. We're not really doing the work of building an intimate relationship. So the way that I kind of convinced him, first of all, I had to do some work on myself because the way
Sure.
that I was approaching him was not right. It was
Yeah.
dysfunctional. So I had to let him know that I want to be connected, just like you want to be connected. We have a shared value. This is one of the secrets of doing conflict well, is to find out what is the shared value. If we both want a healthy marriage, then we're on the same page. So how do we go about getting that? Well, we can't get a healthy marriage if we're not willing to deal with the problems. So once he saw the why, then he was more open to the how. He was more open
Yeah.
to, okay, I might not know how to do conflict, but I'm willing to learn. And then I had to say, and I don't know how to do conflict well, so I have to learn. So we were both on level playing field because we both had to learn how to do this thing the right way. But before we could learn, again, the how, we had to understand the why. Why is this important? Why can't we just brush things under the rug and just pretend that it's okay? Because it's not going to get us to our shared value, to our ultimate goal.
Yeah. As you share, I think I reflect on my own upbringing. My parents divorced when I was, oh gosh, 19 years old. They were married 21 years. And I
Mm.
remember talking to my dad about it at one point, and they were going through counseling, and the counselor basically said, you guys probably never should have got married, which is, as a kid, it's like, oh my God, I wouldn't, maybe I would never would have been.
Right.
Um, but yeah, my parents fought all the time, just stupid stuff. And it
Mm.
was, and my, it was never really violent, but it's just violent anger. Um, and my wife's family is more like the show Leave It to Beaver, the Cleavers, right? I mean, it's
Mm.
just, it's just wholesome family. They're going to church together. The five kids all went to Catholic school. It's just like, wow. And, you know, I kept waiting in the marriage, in our marriage, my marriage, for the blowups. and the blow-ups never came. And it
Mm-hmm.
just took me some time to realize that, okay, using your words, I have work to do. Um, and what I have seen growing up is probably not normal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know what is normal, but it's it wasn't well, it failed. So it wasn't effective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're 31 years. Yeah, we'll be 31 years this year. So we're doing
Love
well.
that.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. Um, what are some strategies for someone who wants to address these issues, the unresolved tensions that are there, whether it's a marriage or something that's happening at work?
Mm-hmm. I'm big on knowing the why. Like, why are you having this conversation? I was talking to someone else. I was on a radio show yesterday. I was talking to this other person, and I said a lot of people go into conversations and they don't really know what they want to get out of the conversation. So, before you ever have a conflicting conversation, you need to know, what is my end goal here? Do I just want to vent? Am I looking for a solution? Do I just want to be heard? So knowing the why before you go into that conversation is going to be very helpful, because then the conversation has an endpoint. I think every husband in America, probably, or maybe around the world, we laugh about it, but it's like they hate the words like "we need to talk."
Hmm.
Because what does that look like?
Yeah.
What that sounds like to, and you're a husband. I mean, you know better than me. But what that probably means is, I'm going to tell you all the things that you're doing wrong. And the conversation is never really going to have an end goal. And so a lot of husbands shy away. I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk. Where wives, generally speaking, obviously there are people that live outside of these generalizations, but most of the time they want a solution. They want to connect. And so for some people, dealing with conflict is a way to disconnect, but for others it's actually a way to connect. So you'll have people who pick fights with you, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, what is wrong with this person? Like, why do they always have something negative to say, or why are they always picking fights with me? They're probably trying to connect with you, and conflict is the only way that they know how to connect. That was my story. I saw conflict so much, and so as a kid, as a teenager, that's how I saw my parents relate. So when I got married, if my husband was watching TV and I didn't feel like he was paying me enough attention, instead of going to him and saying, I would really like for us to spend some time together, I would pick a fight with him. I would find something wrong with him. I would say something that I knew was going to get a reaction, because that attention looked like connection to me.
Yeah.
So if we're really honest with ourselves, some people get really afraid to be just really honest with themselves, because it's like, I don't know what I'm going to find. But we can learn so much about ourselves in looking at our reactions and looking at how we show up in relationships, being willing to ask ourselves some of these deeper questions. So some strategies, to answer your question, I think the first thing is we need to know why I want to have this conversation. And then the other strategy that's probably the most important thing is we have got to learn how to be good listeners. A lot of times we go into these conversations, we want to communicate our thing. We want to
Right.
talk. We think communication equals talking, but communication is two-sided. It's, I'm a sender and I'm a receiver. I'm giving information, but I'm also receiving information. A lot of people do not know, most people do not know how to listen. We can all hear, unless you have a hearing impediment, right? We can all hear, but very few people actually know what it is to listen.
Hmm.
So when you work on learning how to be a good listener, then you're going to see your communication dramatically improve, because you're not just so focused on giving information or talking or getting your point across. You're actually learning how to receive somebody else's perspective as well.
As you talk, I think of the book Crucial Conversations. Have you read?
Yeah, I've got it on my
Just
bookcase right here.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, it's awesome. And I was in a mastermind and we read it and it was like, oh man, this just makes so much sense. It it gives clarity to why just stop and count to 10. I mean, obviously there's more to it than that, but when you start having these conversations with yourself of, yeah, I'm really bothered right now, but I also had a bad night's sleep, right? Or I'm
Hmm.
really bothered right now, and is it really that big of a deal? Is it whatever it is? Is it really that big of a deal that, or maybe it is, but I need to express myself, but also hear what they're about as well.
Hmm.
Um, what advice would you give someone who's just starting on their journey?
I think the best thing that you can do in order to be a healthy partner, again, regardless of what type of relationship, is to be a healthy individual, to not be afraid to look at your baggage, because we all bring baggage into our relationships, regardless of what relationship. If you started a new job, you are bringing baggage from the old job.
Yeah.
If you start a new marriage, you are bringing baggage from whatever relationships you were in prior to that. So the best relationships, I often say this with the premarital people that I counsel, the best time to work on your marriage is before your marriage. The same thing. The best time to work on your problems is before the problems show up. And the way to do that is to look at yourself, to be aware. None of us are perfect, and we're never going to be fully healed individuals. We're all going to have some sort of issues, fault, brokenness, whatever you want to call it. But to be aware of what your struggles are. If you know, for example, that maybe you grew up in a home and you felt rejection all your life. So you know that about yourself. So that means that now when you're in a relationship and let's say your spouse or your partner does something that triggers the rejection in you, you realize, oh, wait, it's not their problem. This is my problem. I've got to figure out, why am I being triggered here? Are they really rejecting me? Or is this me perceiving that what they're doing is rejecting? And so when we're aware of our own shortcomings, our own challenges, the things that we're working on or have worked on, it makes us so much healthier as individuals. And then we can have healthier relationships. So that would be my probably my biggest advice to people, is to really do as much work on yourself as you can and continue that work. I'm constantly working on myself. Even though I do this for a living, I'm helping other people in their relationships. But I realize I have to continue to work on myself, because we grow, we change, new information is presented to us. We're in different environments, different problems come up. So it's an ongoing process of asking yourself those deep questions and not being afraid of what the answers might be.
Love it. Let's shift gears here. I want to talk about you, your business, and how people can help you.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned before, I'm a marriage and relationship coach. I have a podcast. I speak in lots of different arenas, whether that be business conferences, nonprofits, what have you. And of course, I can speak on many topics, but I think the thread that runs through everything I do is connection. We are such a disconnected society, and it's crazy because we've got these things now. We've got these cell phones, right?
Isn't it ironic? Yeah.
And we think we're all so connected, but we really are even more disconnected than our parents' generation. And so what I really want to help people to do is to learn how to reconnect. I often say that disconnection is actually the default of relationships, not connection. And that's a big paradigm shift for people, because we think, oh, I'm in a relationship, this is just going to work out. But you've got to do the work of the relationship in order for it to work. And so connection is what we're after. That's really what we feel like gives our life meaning. We want to be, no one wants to be on an island all by themselves. Even if you have $1 million and, all the luscious fruit and whatever you want, whatever you can imagine you've got on this island, if you're by yourself, it doesn't mean anything. No. But when you feel connected to someone else, that is where we get our worth. That's where we get our fulfillment. That's where we get our value. So I really like to help people to learn how to build those connections across different platforms, across all arenas of life.
Great. Best way to get a hold of you? Your website, danashea.com?
Yes, danashea.com. And I do have, just for, again, the married folks, I do have a partner quiz that I share a lot, because a lot of times people feel like they are connected, but they're not. And so they take this quiz. They can find that at danashea.com, DANACHE.com/partner quiz. And it will rate you, basically, how connected are you. But then it also gives you resources, more importantly, on how to build that connection in your relationship.
And they can find you through there as well.
That's correct.
Okay, yep. Great. I will get danashea.com in the show notes. I really appreciate your time today. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Frank. It was great.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.